Welcome to the Unexpected Podcast. This is Justin Mahwikizi, and today's guest is Janice Goldwater, a person with plenty of experience within the nonprofit sector and a great story of being a human in today's world. Janice, thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin, for inviting me to have this conversation with you. We really appreciate it.
Sure, no thing. We actually were introduced by Laura DeVelius, our past a guest here. So I wanted to begin with a couple of questions on her and to understand who you are as a person. And the way she introduced you was that you were her mentor. What does it mean when someone you supervised 7 years ago or so still calls you a mentor today? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, first of all, it's an incredible honor. I feel so incredibly fortunate and blessed and just grateful that not only could we work together to make incredible impacts in the lives of children and families, but we grew together as human beings. You know, knowing that I had such a role in her life, it's like an incredible gift. It's an incredible gift and an honor and something that I do not take lightly. And to me, Laura is really spectacular because I started the organization, as a social worker, and probably the last piece that I figured out was development. It was the programs, the services, that was great, but figuring out how to most effectively fundraise was probably the hardest part. So Laura and I worked together for many years. And she created this foundation that was so strong and so effective that once she left, we didn't miss a beat. And that's the thing about an organization with a really strong infrastructure, is that we don't have to miss beats when changes happen.
Can you define, if you don't mind, as a follow-up on that, can you define what structure means within the nonprofit world?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. When people think about nonprofits and they think about missions, they think about the delivery of a service, how like what I'm doing as a social worker impacts the life of the person I'm serving. What people often don't think about, though, is what does it take to support that person? So when I started Adoptions Together in 1990, it was myself and one other person. And I literally, it was back then, there's something called call forwarding. So I literally would forward the phones to my house in the evening.
Wow.
So, in my phone that sat on my nightstand, I'd answer Adoptions Together. I had a second line, and then I'd forward it back in the morning. And that was that's not sustainable infrastructure. So when I talk about structure, I'm thinking about things like administrative services. I'm thinking about IT. I'm thinking about creation of budgets. I'm thinking about all of the critical pieces that come into making an organization or a business run effectively. For anybody who works in a business, an organization, an agency, that you are so much more than that actual service or transaction that you're delivering. Without policy, without procedure, without formal practices, you're only as good as you are in that moment. It's one dimensional, not multidimensional.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah.
I was going to say that's one of the reasons why I asked that follow-up question is that most people see and think about nonprofit as this different type of organization. The mission is different, of course. Where the profit goes is different. However, running the organization requires the same best practices as another business, and so that's why I wanted people to hear from your perspective, your early beginnings, and how you had to eventually grow and put some processes and procedures around to actually make it work, whether somebody's there or not. And that's what you mean by we didn't miss a beat.
That's right. That means that we established systems and protocols, and had resources. We had to develop a database. We had to develop mechanisms to communicate with people. All of that takes time and effort. And, as a social worker, when I started, I was just all about the services.
Yeah.
And I didn't, before I really lived in the nonprofit world, I didn't understand, like, well, why does the United Way take something off the top? Like, if they're raising money, they need to give every dollar to the nonprofit. But then they were really excited about the mission of Adoptions Together, which is now Paths for Families. But we did a lot of work together, in the early years, and they met with families who were adopting children. They came to all kinds of events, and we became sort of the face of the local United Way. And so then what I got to see was the incredible amount of work that went into them working with me. And also I was busy working with them and I wasn't providing a direct service, yet the money that we could raise by working together allowed me to then hire staff that I could then welcome more children and families who needed services, and also develop more infrastructure that would allow the story to be told, whether it was me directly doing it, or, somebody else.
No, that's great. Who were the mentors that shaped Janice Goldwater?
Yeah. I love that question because it brings me right back to college. I went to college at Ithaca College in upstate New York.
Yeah.
And I had, I kind of struggled a little bit in college, and I wasn't a high achieving high school student. I got to college, and soon after I got to college, my mother had breast cancer, and I was kind of shaky. I mean, she kicked it. She was fine at that time. But they had moved to Miami, and I didn't want to be in school. I didn't feel connected. And I had a professor named Jules Bergevin, and he taught a class called The Sociology of Responsibility. And oh my God, it rocked my world. He talked about each of us having the responsibility to impact the lives of each other. And, if you see somebody struggling, do something about it. Don't walk past, don't look the other way, step in and do something. And he saw me struggling and he reached out. And I remember one time after class talking to him, and he said, let's go get a beer. And we went to the pub and we drank a beer and we talked, and I told him how lonely I was. And he just embraced me in such a beautiful way that made me feel seen, made me feel valued. And in turn, I got really excited about the work I was doing. And all of a sudden my grades shot up, my engagement shot up. I began making friends, and adjusting so much better. So I'll always be grateful to him. And the second mentor was in graduate school. I went to Washington University in St. Louis, got my master's degree in social work. And I had a professor named Jack Kirkland. And oh my God, he was such a rock star. I think every semester I was there, I took a class with him because he was so dynamic. And he basically instilled in us that if we were going to be successful in our education, in our work, we were going to do something in the world. He's like, whether it's joining the school board, it was the same theme. You see something, you say something, you do something. Yeah. So it was with that message that it was completely charged to do something when I saw something, which is why I started the organization in the first place.
What did you see that made you pause and said, this is going to be my mission?
It's so interesting because when I was in graduate school, I trained to be a therapist, and all I wanted to be was a therapist, working with women primarily, working with adults, working with teens. And then once I was in practice, I worked in community mental health center for about 3 or so years, with high volume, community-based. And then I became a mother. And after I became a mother, I fell madly in love with my son. I mean, I had this feeling that I had never had before about children. And I, for the first time, really understood the vulnerability of children. And I happened to see on a National Association of Social Workers listserv. It wasn't a listserv back then, it was a bulletin board. It was that long ago. A job doing some work for an adoption agency. So it was doing home studies, evaluating prospective adopted parents. So I began I interviewed for that and began doing that work on a part-time basis, and found I was more excited about that than anything. I thought I had been excited about a number of things, but there was something about adoption, something about children of parents, children who are born to parents who are unable to care for them through no fault of their own, through no fault of the parent, but life has delivered whatever variables to the expected now birth parent that made it impossible for them to parent their children and give them what they needed. So they were choosing adoption. And then seeing children then go into families that were fully prepared and wanted nothing more than to take their love and channel it into a child. But I also I worked in the field for some years and saw there were some real problems for healthy majority race kids. There was every opportunity, and everybody else went to social services where they would spend years in foster care, sometimes moving from home to home as infants and toddlers. I also saw in DC in the 80s, we had the crack cocaine epidemic for very, very, very sick women who were addicted to crack cocaine, would give birth to their children, and that pull of their body to pain to get back out would motivate them to leave their child in the hospital and these children so they could get relief from that terrible pain. So their children would spend, months, sometimes years in the hospital. So that spoke so loud. That to me, seeing that problem right there, seeing that every human being who has the same inherent worth, regardless of what we look on the outside or what's made up on our inside, every child needs a family. Every child needs a family. So I started this organization with the mission of welcoming and serving every child who is in need of a family. And that mission, also as a social worker, as a therapist, I saw that adoptees, children who were adopted, adults who were adopted, were much more highly represented in the mental health system in both inpatient and outpatient. And I wanted to understand, why is it that their parents had to go through home studies, that they go for services more frequently, more easily, that they're trained from the very beginning to get help, or there's some other reason. So I wanted to develop services that would specifically understand the issues of loss, the issues of identity, and all of the issues that are very specific to adoption and foster care. So we could use, in my graduate program, we also had primary prevention. Back then, that was pretty radical, but it's basically through teaching people about things, you can prevent problems.
Yes.
So
that's a big thing that I realized myself, how much knowledge and just the awareness of systems literacy and other types of literacy can allow someone to have more to know that they have more choices than just that one potentially negative one.
That's right. That's right.
Now, that's amazing, by the way. Thank you for sharing. Because most people never fully know how things got started. And now people can understand how the mission of your organizations, but who the real person is behind them. You recently transitioned out of the organization you founded after 34 years. Was that harder to leave than starting it? Because sometimes it could be both emotionally draining.
Oh my goodness. I mean, honestly, it was kind of excruciating. And I had to, and it's so interesting thinking about the whole idea of succession planning. There was years that I had board members say, you need to think about succession planning. And honestly, I couldn't do it because I could never imagine myself and the agency not being as one. I mean, I was the agency. There's part of me that really felt that way. And then as the years went on, I found that maybe it was time for me to take some of the wisdom and the experience that I have and really begin to think about living my life differently. I have 4 children that I raised. I lived this super, super fast life for a lot of years. And after COVID, and many of the things that happened, I found myself getting tired. And fortunately, I have the ability to watch myself. And I was thinking, like, you know what, you're not quite as, your energy isn't the same as it once was. And this organization, this mission deserves this somebody who's got the right energy. So I had like a fabulous board chair and a fabulous board. And I finally found the words to say, I need to think about succession planning. And it was a 3-year process. So we started 3 years out, and it was a very intentional process, where I did all kinds of training for myself personally. I had very clear goals of having the organization being whole, healthy, and dynamic, by having a strong board and a strong staff, because the most important thing is that mission. And I wanted to ensure that mission would stay alive, past me, because the mission is way bigger than any one human being. So my second goal was for me to end up whole and for me to end up feeling complete by the time I left. So I did a number of personal growth kinds of activities, by the way of courses, support groups, study. And I also, and worked with my board. We had a committee. It was a 3-year process. We looked at the organization and did some restructuring. 3 years when we first started into it, to create more of a launching pad within, and really looked at strengthening the leaders within, and also looking at all the different options for the organization. Everything from, should we merge with another organization? Should we bring somebody in from the outside? Do we have talent inside? And if we do have talent inside, how can we nurture it?
Right.
And so it was a really super intentional process. And I feel so proud of the board, of the staff, of myself, to have executed this all. And I had an additional gift along the way. My dad, who was 99, entered his final chapter in January. So, I left that following June of 24. So that January, I went to see him, and he wasn't looking so good. So I decided he was in Florida and I lived in Maryland. So I decided I'd better stay around and be with him. I had my computer, I could fully work, we're virtual. And, as I was loving him and nurturing him through his final chapter with the support of hospice care, I was also saying goodbye to the community, letting people know, because we had a very well thought out communication plan as a part of this, because having the community know that this organization was going to be just as effective and just as strong with somebody else at the leadership was critically important. Being with my dad and loving him and supporting him through his final days was critically important to me. So I was able to be with him for those 19 days until he transitioned. And so it was just such a deeply, deeply spiritual time, for me, just really looking within at impact. What does it mean to be a daughter? What does it mean to be this many years old and to walk alongside? How did his life make sense to him? What lessons does he have in his almost 100th year? He's 4 months short of his 100th birthday, that I could still learn from him. So it was really powerful.
It was your final time at the organization, but also a time for final lessons from Dad.
From Dad. Yep. Yeah.
That's beautiful. You described about succession planning. What did you learn through that process that most founders, whether it's full profit or nonprofit, should know about? Because a lot of founders are nervous about it, like you were. What lessons, best practices did you learn as a founder going through that process that should encourage others to do so?
Right. I think that's a great question. I think first, to get comfortable sort of with the content of it, like what does it mean? You recognizing, in a nonprofit, the mission is the most important thing. What does the mission need to continue? It needs a really strong board. It needs financial security. It needs well-trained staff who are able to execute. And then how can I ensure that these pieces are in place? And so developing a team, and also getting the information. I did a lot of reading, as I said, a lot of studying. I joined a 6-month program of other people going through it. I developed a relationship with another CEO who was also transitioning out of her role, and we coached each other and counseled each other. I had to learn. I very much believe in psychoeducation. I very much guided by neuroscience and our brains, and so I needed that psycho ed to understand what are normal feelings through this process. So if I was having some kind of a feeling, I didn't have to act on it. I could say, that's what they were talking about in their class. That's what
skill to be able to recognize, yourself going through a specific experience and stop yourself and say, oh, I know what this is, versus letting all those emotions lead you left or right, but you feel out of control.
Yeah. Something we talk about is noticing and naming. So I notice the feeling and then name it. And then by noticing and naming it, then it's okay, this is fear. And then the first thing, I slow my system down, through really, again, being intentional. I had to be really intentional about this. I highly don't recommend doing anything by the seat of your pants and leaving, and I think one thing with the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit is I have a close friend who is a psychologist, and she sold her practice. And every Sunday we walked 5 miles together on a path, and we did that for a number of years. And she very much wanted things to continue. She's extremely ethical. She made lots of plans so the organization would continue with as much of her value system. So she didn't just sell out to a big venture capitalist or somebody she didn't think would, have the same loving care. She also sold it. So she was financially enriched by selling it. With a nonprofit, I was not financially enriched when I left. I am enriched by the mission, by the work, by the thousands of children who now have families, by the legacy of trauma that is changing, from one generation to the next. But the mission is the gold. The mission is the gold in a nonprofit. So if egos get involved, there's, you don't have, at the end of the day, she bought a house in another part of the country and moved someplace really beautiful, and she's pretty financially abundant. That's not something a nonprofit founder has.
Right.
That's not, and for not a minute, well, maybe a minute, but not much more than a minute, do I really regret having, the legacy that I do, and not having what she has.
Yeah, that's it's the trade-off. But I'm recently coming from the for-profit world and trying to understand the nonprofit world. And as a native of a country called Burundi in East Africa for the first 12 years of my life, when you come from that place and come to the States, there's a deep distrust in nonprofits, because over there, what they promise is not necessarily what they deliver. And so it took me a long time to acquaint myself with the nonprofit model here in the U.S. And so I learned to embrace it. I learned to platform it. But I have to go through the unlearning process of the for-profit mindset, where mission is first, right? The pennies are not. And so I'm going through that transition. What you just said resonated with me because you see it from the other side as well.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, I come from the generation where the leaders that put the needs of the organization above the needs of the staff. And I think that's one of the lessons that I learned along the way, that my needs as a human being mattered, the needs of my staff matter. And, there was, we used to just think it was great. I worked 16 hours today. Great. I did it. But that's good. That's not good. And there was a time that my board wanted to raise my salary, and I was like, oh, no, 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 no. Like, if I take less money, then another child's going to get served. But then I have 4 children I have to feed, and like, why should I live substandard? Like, why do my needs not matter? So I had to do a lot of personal growth work to really recognize that I matter, that for my staff, I need to pay them well, because the more safe and comfortable somebody is, and not excessive, but safe and comfortable, the better they can show up for those that they serve.
That's a great lesson.
So,
That's a great
yeah.
lesson. But here's the thing, a question for you. When you started Paths for Families, did you think it was going to still exist 34 years later?
It's such a good question. The truth is, Justin, I was so into the moment that it was like one moment to the next that, and I'd have to have a budget for the next year, and I'd have to fundraise, and I'd have to, like, I didn't think about, I mean, we did strategic
You lived in the
planning.
moment. You were so in the moment
I
that
was so in the moment.
you didn't see it.
And at the same time, we had strategic plans. We invested in strategic plans. It took about 7 years to begin to think about a strategic plan. But I remember, wasn't the first 7 years, everything seemed to fall into place really easily. And then we developed stepped in our first hole after 7 years. And it was really at that time I had to learn, because again, I'm not trained as a business person. So the gift that I do have is the ability to recognize and attract lots of incredibly brilliant people who then came together and really helped provide the pieces so we could do things like think about the future. And we could, I was always scanning the environment for best practice, for new and emerging information about the brain and the body and the nervous system, and adoption and human connection and trauma, and the trauma's impact on us as developing human beings and as adults, and how it breeds disconnection, not connection, and then what do we do about it? So all those parts, I was, I'm gobbling all of that up. And at the same time, as a leader, as a business leader, I had to make sure that we're really doing the strategic planning and those other pieces. So surrounding myself with the right people, make sure that we were doing that. You say 34 years, I guess I could never imagine it not existing. So it's more than I could never.
Better. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. And it's still going today. Yeah.
It's going great. And, it's going great. I just went this week to a book reading. Somebody who was formerly on our board, she herself was adopted and didn't find out till she was Deborah Jennings. Her book is called Ghost Child. She didn't find out that she was adopted till she was about 33.
Wow.
And sort of the whole unpacking of that. And she and her husband adopted their twin boys, who are now in their 30s. And so anyway, we had a book reading, and I went and facilitated the conversation. And it was wonderful, to be with the community.
That's amazing. You just touched something important on leadership. You said that you have an ability to attract very talented people. Why is that such an important thing in leadership, whether it's in the corporate world or in life and growing families? How are you able to recognize talent, attract them? Tell us about that skill. Were you born with it, or did you develop it?
I think I was both born with it and developed it over time. I mean, I think I have an uncanny luck, both luck and ability. Like, I'm interested, in people. And so whether it's someone sitting next to me on the airplane, I mean, I don't chat the whole time when you sit next to me, but there was time that, I did some pretty effective fundraising on the airplane. Found parents for kids, and I mean, unbelievable. But I think by being very open and constantly scanning the universe and being sort of insatiably curious, and by seeing people, by listening, when we can get stuck in our own way, we can block when we can actually like fully show up and see who's in front of us and embrace their strengths and not be afraid to not know something and to welcome another perspective. I mean, one of the gifts of being wrong is the opportunity to see that there's another way to see it.
Yes, yes. In fact, I have tomorrow he's going to be 16 years old, my oldest, and I'm very purposeful and intentional in teaching him how to have difficult conversations. And I will often take the other side of whatever argument he's having, or just to push and see how he can grow his ability to to see a different way of life he's not aware of. And so I can appreciate that from your perspective, being able to do that and having that skill set. I think it's a great leadership skill set.
Yeah, thank you. And then also the other piece of it is then sort of the currency, like what motivates somebody to help. Because in the nonprofit world, there are people who get paid to do the work that they're doing, and there's people who serve as volunteers. And so when we volunteer for something, it's like, well, we have to be motivated.
Yeah.
So like understanding the currency and that motivates somebody, I think is a really important skill. And just knowing that we're not checking off boxes, this many people volunteering or this many people serving on the board, that each person really matters. And we only have a certain number of units of energy in our lives, a certain lifespan, and how we choose to invest our time is really important.
I agree. When we first met, you told me about two stories about two children. One was a child born without a stem, I think, if I have that.
With the brainstem, yeah.
And with only a brain stem. And the other was the doctors just didn't believe that child would survive.
Yeah.
Tell us about those stories, if you don't mind, and how did those stories change you as a person?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, there was just so many children over the years that rocked my world to my core. With this one little guy, Tommy, he was what his birth mother named him. He was born just with the brain stem, which is the lowest part of the brain. So he did not have a midbrain, the emotional center. He did not have an upper brain, the thinking part of the brain. And he was just really uncomfortable. And so she wanted to make an adoption plan for him. She didn't feel equipped to care for him. And so he never made it out of the hospital. But when he came to us, she had a DNR on him. And once the hospital knew that she was making an adoption plan, they said, we don't take off the DNR. So we had to meet with the ethics committee, who said they looked at something called vitality. So it was a room full of people, of doctors, that did a full analysis on this child to really look at how much should they intervene. And they all decided they should intervene. It didn't matter that he was in pain. There was something about this child that they wanted to not have a DNR. Unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe for him, because he was suffering, he died of pneumonia about a week later.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd have a funeral with Mom and our team, for him, and a burial.
And
so that was
yeah, no, I was just going to say that I'm thankful that they still made that decision to give him time, because sometimes you got to fight till the end, but
you got to fight till the end. Yeah.
Yeah. How to fight, right? Because you never know.
Yeah. You never know. But then another situation, there was a baby girl named Michelle. This is actually different ones, and I told you about, but Michelle was born at about 2 pounds, 3 ounces. Her mom had a terrible, terrible problem with heroin. Her addiction was so severe that she literally was shooting into her breast, vein in her breast to get, because that was the only vein she could. I mean, she was so sick. And then poor Michelle, born premature at 2 pounds, 3 ounces. And so we found a family who just fully embraced her, and they went to the hospital. And it was interesting because the hospital staff said, "Why would you want to adopt a child like this?" And the mom, Danny is her name, she said, "This is my child. Like, don't. Why would you say that about any child?" Anyway, they had to do physical therapy for her to suck her bottle. She had cerebral palsy. They did so many interventions. Well, when she was about 3, she walked with her, she had braces, but she could sing Frere Jacques in English and French.
Yeah.
She was just about the cutest thing in the world. And she actually graduated college recently and went to paralegal school.
Amazing.
And works in a judge's office. It's just unbelievable. It's just because her parents invested in giving her just what she needed. And honestly, they feel like the luckiest parents in the world, both her mom and her dad. And it's just such a beautiful story. There's, no such thing as a throwaway child.
There isn't. And any parent will know this, that it's that one degree of improvement, at whatever stage your child is at, is worth everything. And that's what I tell, young people that I sometimes run into here in Chicago who say, "I'll never bring a child into this world." I'm like, no, you don't know what you're missing. Just that one degree of improvement will literally make your year from an emotional perspective. So I'm glad to hear Michelle's story, and I'm thankful for her parents for investing in her and hanging through with her.
The child that I told you about was Nolan. So Nolan was born. He was originally supposed to be adopted in the community. His birth mother was working with a lawyer, and when he was born, he was quite sick. So the family that he was working with did not want to adopt a sick child. So she called the agency and said, because they knew we would welcome every child, regardless, whatever. And so we said, absolutely, we're glad. So the work, then his intestines were on the outside and they malrotated. So he, which is like twisted. So he ended up losing 80% of his intestines. And he also, when he first came to us, the doctors had him on a DNR. They did not think he was going to make it. We didn't know when we looked for a family for him, whether it was going to be for a few weeks, again, like our other little guy, Tommy, who didn't, got the pneumonia, would it be for a longer life. And we found just the absolute perfect parents who said, mom actually worked in palliative care at a children's hospital. And she said, as long as you will respect our right as parents to not make him suffer, we'll step into this role and we'll see how things go. Well, he had some surgeries. He got a little bit better and he went home with them. And he's been come in and out of the hospital over the years. Today, he's 11 years old. He is thriving. He had something for years. He had something called TPN, which I forget what TPN stands for, but it's liquid nutrition. And he had a little bag that the nutrition went in. But today he can eat solid foods, and it's unbelievable. So what I did back then was I actually joined a Facebook group called Short-Gut Syndrome families, or families with children with short-gut syndrome, because I had to really understand the fullness, what does this mean, for him? Because in the beginning, back then, I was his guardian. And so just making sure we were making really good decisions together. So it just...
Today he can eat on his own, and tomorrow I'm sure he's going to win a Nobel Prize in whatever subject he wants to.
You better believe it. Yeah. I mean, he's in the 5th grade. He is academically way ahead of himself. He is just so loved and so cherished. And he's this brilliant child. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. Yeah.
I mean, I know the answer to the next question, but how many times in your career did you witness outcomes that doctors thought were impossible?
Multiple times, multiple times. That's all I can say, multiple times. I mean, and not every situation, like the first one we talked about, that didn't necessarily have an outcome that, was joyful or easy. It was painful. But I mean, just over and over again, seeing these precious human beings. And, we began placing older kids. For years, we did intercountry adoption of kids from other countries. And kids of all different health and age statuses, and then kids that are residing in foster care in this country. There was a sibling group of 4 at the time when the family was looking at their kids were 12, 13, and 15, and they had a 17-year-old sibling who said, "I don't want to be adopted," but the younger ones all did. And so this family, they were living in another state. They might not have been Illinois. And once this 17-year-old met this family and saw that he could continue, he liked shop and automotive work, and that they would let him continue to be who he was and he wanted to be, he agreed, and he got adopted. The whole sibling group got adopted together. And just seeing this family utilize all the post-adoption support services and the parent support groups and the counseling for the kids and the counseling for the family and all the psychoed that comes into raising children who've experienced trauma, it was just beautiful. Just beautiful to see that really flourish.
When you welcomed every child, regardless of complexity, what did that teach you about human worth?
It reinforced a lesson that I always believed to be true, and that's that every one of us matter. Every one of us were born into this world, and regardless where we started, we all matter. And when we see each other, when we nurture each other, when we value each other, we then have the possibility of really fulfilling our potential.
Yeah. No, there's a famous African song, contemporary, that says something like, "Nobody's a nobody, so go ahead and tell somebody." Right? It's
I love that. I love
everybody.
that.
Yeah. What happens to a child's brain when they repeatedly go through abandonment or they experience abandonment? Can you tell the psychological impact?
Sure. So when I think about abandonment or neglect or trauma, it changes how our brains develop. When we're born, our brains are not fully developed. And so they develop in response to our environment. So if we have a need, we express our need is met, we learn that the world is a safe place, that our needs matter, and that that I matter. If we have a need, we express our need, and it's met intermittently, we don't know if it's safe. Maybe sometimes we're hit, sometimes we're ignored. We then are actually the neural connections of the brain actually change because our brain is wired to survive. And so we learn to do things differently to survive because we don't know how our brains, how we're going to be responded to. Or if we cry and no one comes and they don't feed us and they leave us, we'll shut down. So literally the baby can die from a failure to thrive if they can be given food, but if they're not seen and held, they literally will stop eating and they actually can die. The beautiful thing about the brain is that it's got neuroplasticity. It's always changing. Our brains right now, Justin, as we're talking, they're changing. We're reading each other's cues. We're looking at each other. We're in a conversation. If one of us gets upset, the other one might. because we're all interconnected. And so our brains are going to be responding to what's happening in the environment. So for children who have experienced trauma, either in infancy or really, any stage through child development, they often don't meet some of the kind of milestones that happen for brain development. So our brain starts at the brain stem, then moves through the midbrain, and then prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex doesn't fully come online until our higher level thinking, until we're a bit older, and it's not fully developed until we're 25.
Oh, wow.
25 years old. So, babies are like lizards, infants are like lizards, and then they get their midbrain and that comes online and they start smiling and they're interactive, and then the ability to problem solve and to think abstractly and to be strategic doesn't come on till later on. So brains that had to adapt and survive in a traumatic environment have to rewire in a way that allows them to survive. So if you take that child and then you put them who's survived through maybe some difficult behaviors, and then you put them in a stable environment, they're not going to feel stable. They're going to be hypervigilant. They're going to always be watching for danger because their brain, their adaptive strategy was to be super hypervigilant. So a lot of the work becomes like through relationship, hurt that happens in the context of relationship heals in the context of relationship. So
No,
it's a lot.
I agree. You have to have as many, if not more, positive experiences as possibly more than the negative experiences, so that on average your system can start slowly adjusting.
That's right.
Because in an urban environment with the teenagers here in Chicago, I call it as at some point a child loses trust in mankind,
Of
and
course.
they can never trust anyone unless through experience and experiential process they begin to trust and then open up. But that takes time and care.
Mm-hmm.
That's what your organization and parents that adopt kids try to help with that.
That's right. And that's something that I think about all the time. Just, when I work with organizations around workplace issues, when I, do support groups with parents, when I, do different kinds of things in the community and trainings, like, how do we see each other? How do we feel felt? How do we feel understood when we might feel so misunderstood? Like what I loved when you talked about what it was like growing up and seeing these nonprofits, enriching themselves maybe and not the people they're supposed to serve. Now you're in a spot as a banker that you have the ability to work with nonprofits, but it's like getting past, do I even want to work with these people? Are they safe? Are they reliable? Wait, no.
It took time for me and more. I had to have an experiential experience with people in the nonprofit industry. I had to read financial statements because I'm a banker by trade. And it's like, oh, okay, there is some purpose here. I understand what's happening. And it took me a long time to learn to trust. And come to think, my career has driven me towards working with nonprofits. After years of studying poverty and trying to alleviate poverty through communities here in the States, because I thought, why it's very hard to change people 30,000 miles away. Let's start here at home. Let's see what I can learn from the experience. So that's what I learned. So from that perspective, I've gone through a process of relearning what nonprofits are, and now I'm being a big advocate for nonprofits. So
I think that's just a beautiful example of how time, positive experience, the relationships you've probably developed with people in the nonprofit community, and enough times that it's like, okay, well, I thought this was dangerous, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. And you probably are watching a little extra carefully to make sure that you're working with the right kind of people.
I am, but at the same time, I'm motivated because I lost decades that I could have been helping more. And so from that perspective, I really have a mission to
Yeah.
engage with
Wow.
nonprofits and provide my 2 cents if I can, and build coalitions. I don't believe in recreating the wheel. I believe in gathering and amplifying everybody's work together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just so inspired just by that example, because that's exactly what we have to do when we've had trauma. And whether it's relational, like, how do we learn to trust again? And then on the other side, it's like that mountain that you walked over, and now here you are in this beautiful spot. There's so much positive impact you can have. And when there's that voice inside that's like, but you should have done it sooner. It's like, no, this is what it took to get here. And oh my God, I'm so glad that you're there.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're too. What back to the children, because this is I've been reading about it, and I think that you may be able to help our audience understand this. Whether it's from a parenting, educational perspective, just normal life. What is the difference between asking a child what's wrong with you and asking what happened to you?
Yeah. That's such a different paradigm to say to a child or to any one of us when something happens. We know how it feels. What's wrong with you? You can have a behavior. What's wrong with you that you would not tell the truth? What's wrong with you that you hit Daquan in the whatever? Wait, what's wrong with you that you took something that wasn't yours? Well, what happened? Like, if we step back, we can understand what's the thinking, what's the reason behind that a child did it. And when I talk about adaptive behaviors, for kids who have been hurt early in life, to survive, they need to develop some adaptive strategies and behaviors that can look pretty darn antisocial. They can look pretty darn antisocial. But if you're starving, you need to eat. So where do you get your food? And so how do we then, by being curious about what happened to you, one, it helps me as another human being have empathy. And if, even for yourself, as you look at what happened with those prophets, why did you feel that way? Maybe then you'll give yourself more grace and have more empathy to be like, okay, it took me this long to get the information I needed. So now I can really excel in my work of serving communities.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
What have you learned about human resilience that most people don't understand after your experience working within the nonprofit and today, and being a parent, of course?
Yeah. That, resilience is something that we'll have, and it needs to be nurtured and developed. People say, just pull up your bootstraps. Well, maybe you don't have any boots and you have no straps to pull up.
That's right.
And so, it's like telling somebody that doesn't have legs to run across the street, hurry up, watch out for the guy. Like, we don't, to not make assumptions, and that if somebody is not producing something or doing something, then to really look back at nurturing. I mean, the more people are seen, the more they're felt, the more they're understood, the more their internal process is going to strengthen, and the more resilience that they'll develop. It's kind of like when we're down, it's really hard to jump up.
Yes.
Which is what resilience is. But when we're down and somebody helps us get back up, it's often through that relationship. I mean, the power of relationships and resilience is so incredibly strong. You, me, any one of us human beings can make a huge difference in the life of another human being just by having them feel seen and felt and understood.
I agree. And sometimes it only takes one time where someone helps you back up to know that there's someone out there who could help you back
That's
up.
right.
The next time you're
That's right.
down, rather, you're looking for someone to help versus, because we tend sometimes to be down on ourselves. We go through that depression period and we're, what's wrong with this, versus being observant for that opportunity, because it's always there. But if you don't see it, you're not going to take advantage of it.
Yeah. But like Jules Bergevin, that professor I had at Ithaca College, he was that for me, at that time. And I was just one of the many students in his class, but he cared so deeply about the students that he embodied the sociology of responsibility. He lived his truth, and it changed my life.
Yeah, no, it was a good man. Now, you and your husband adopted a 10-year-old girl who had already experienced tremendous trauma. What made you say yes?
So, it's so interesting. We had 3 children born to us, and our oldest was going off to college. And it was in his senior year of high school that we decided, you know, we were pretty good parents. I mean, he wasn't the easiest guy to raise, and he was like so awesome, and we felt really good. And we're like, okay, we got room for one more. So we knew we have 2 boys and a girl born to us, and so we knew that I wanted another daughter. I'm one of 4 girls, and always imagined myself as the mother of daughters, which a lot of women do, and a lot of men imagine themselves as the father of sons. And we love whoever comes to us. But anyway, we decided to adopt a 4th child, and they had to be younger than my son Tim, who was about 11 and a half at the time, now almost 12. And so we really, what we were looking for was the healthiest child we could find. I knew about trauma. I knew, I taught all about supporting families, and I knew all the work. So I didn't know what my capacity would be, having a full-time job and 3 other kids, to have a child with really high needs. So we looked for the healthiest child we could find, and we found just the right child who was not the one that we imagined we would be adopting. And she's the light of my life, and she's probably been one of my absolute greatest teachers, because what she taught me was things are so much easier said than done. And being her mother basically brought me to my knees, and I had to relearn everything from the bottom up, just how to be a mother. Like, what does it mean to show up for somebody who's rejecting you? What does it mean to show up for somebody who says, no, the world is not a safe place and I don't matter, and let me show you through my behaviors that the world is not a safe place and I don't matter? So we had just a lot of years of really intensive work. And, right now I would say in awe. I mean, she's 34 and she had a baby 6 weeks ago, and she's the most beautiful mother. I mean, she's just so attuned to her child. She loves him so much, and I watch her, and it just, it's like a dream come true, to see her with this child, her and her partner with their son. And it's so beautiful. So beautiful. Makes all that work. It was worth it before he was born, because she's whole. She's whole.
Yes.
And now seeing the next generation, that this child is going to be raised with stability and safety, without trauma. He's got 2 sets of grandparents who just, are thrilled with him.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's full circle for your daughter. And
full circle. Yeah.
When we first met, you also shared a story about an experience with a therapist where that therapist made you feel like you were the problem, and another who asked you how you were taking care of yourself. Why was the second conversation transformational?
Well, it's funny, because the second conversation was with Bruce Perry, Dr. Bruce Perry, who he and Oprah wrote a fabulous book about childhood trauma. It's called What Happened to You? And it's all about that paradigm of moving from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Highly recommended. It's a whole series of stories. But anyway, he has developed, it's called a neurosequential matrix, which basically looks at the brain and brain developments from the bottom up, from the brain stem. And he uses a neuropsych, and he charts out where there's been deficits and then what needs to be done to help a child heal. And we had the gift of having him use our daughter's neuropsych as a teaching tool. There's a psychologist in his training, and she anonymously presented her. And she was about 19 at the time. I think the neuropsych was done when she was 18. And then afterwards, Bruce Perry said, well, Mom and Dad, would you like to meet with me? So it was so good. So we were completely thrilled, because, he's a nationally known person, and he's a little bit difficult to sort of get a one-on-one with.
Right.
Anyway, I had gone to a therapist a week before we had this follow-up visit with him. I was depressed. She was 19. Her behaviors were off the chart. And this therapist, what I heard her say was, we can absolutely look at what's wrong with you, that you would keep this misbehaving young adult in your home. And I remember leaving there just feeling like, not only does my life kind of stink because it's living the way we're living is pretty difficult, and there's something wrong with me. Well, when we met with Bruce Perry, he began by saying, you have a really complicated child. What are you doing to take care of yourselves so you can continue to show up? Because the best thing she has going for her is your commitment to her. So how you take care of yourself really matters. He said, and I think she's going to be okay at some point, maybe by the time she's 30. And I remember my husband and I looked at each other. We're like, we're not going to survive that long. And he's like, yes, you are, because you're going to take care of yourselves. And let's talk about how you're going to take care of yourselves so you can stay in the game, because she needs you. And I remember just like the whole world lightened. I felt seen. I felt understood. I felt like, to me, the success of my child was so critically important. I don't want to feel like there was something wrong with me. My life was really hard. There wasn't something wrong with me that made me stay in the game. And so with him using that language, it just set me on this path of like, yeah, we can do this. We got this. And, she moved out right before her 30th birthday. And I told her the story about this. And she's like, let's call him and tell him. So I'm just waiting to see him at a training somewhere along the way. He does a lot of training. He's fabulous. Again, Dr. Bruce Perry. It's called the Child Trauma Institute. He actually, Bruce, I think he lives in the Chicagoland area.
Does he really?
Yeah. I mean, I know he did at one time. I don't know if he's still there. But
maybe I can run into him, because it's a great conversation. What he essentially showed you, and say, hey, give her time. But he's also showing you how to buy time, and
how to buy time.
You don't always have to have money to buy time.
That's right.
Once you're psychologically understand that you have a runway to solve a problem or get to a solution, you're much calmer. You're more
Absolutely
present, right? You're not trying to see what's going to happen tomorrow or regret what happened yesterday. You're just in the moment because you have time, and that's the greatest gift that I think Bruce Perry gave you guys.
Oh, such a gift. I will always be grateful to him, and it gave me hope. And there was a presentation I used to do at conferences quite a bit, called "Keeping Hope Eternal When Dreams and Reality Collide." Like, how do we keep hope eternal? How do we stay in the game when what we dreamed about and what actually happened collide? So he gave me hope.
That's great. I hope one day either you and your daughter see him again, or I run into him. If I do, I'll bring up this story, and I hope you remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you've raised money from foundations, governments, individual donors. What donor type was the hardest to work with, and why?
Such a good question. One, I valued every dollar that anybody invested in the mission. And probably the most difficult donor type was those that had really distinct and rigid guidelines about reporting, that we would write an extensive grant and then do quarterly reporting. And sometimes their fiscal year was a different fiscal year than ours. And so we kept very detailed stats of everything that we did. And we had monthly financial statements, and annual financial statements. So like the reporting piece, for some, we would spend hours and hours and hours doing it. Or maybe it would be a foundation. We would write something and then they wanted something slightly different and something different, but then, oh, that's not really what they wanted. So we would invest all this time and then not have a financial outcome. I think the best way to think about investing in a nonprofit is to do the due diligence, to see firsthand what they're doing. Maybe you're not going to see the actual service, but to, have a conversation, in not an AI driven one. And we didn't have AI back then, but I'm sure a lot of grants are now AI driven.
Really? Just like employment, huh? They have the AI read them all?
Sure. Yeah.
Oops.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So to have, to really have a conversation and really get into the meat of what it is they're doing and how are they collecting data and what kind of infrastructure do they have to support their work? And what if, do you have a succession plan? Do you have a succession plan? What's your leadership team look like? And is it a small nonprofit with 2 people? Okay, well, there's a lot of really small nonprofits that do incredible work. But what happens if you get sick? Who's going to carry on that work? And how do you measure success? That our best donors were the ones that really learned about the work we were doing and had really coherent and articulate conversations about it. Because people donate money for lots of different reasons, maybe because their life was impacted by, whether your a disease or it could be hospice, it could be, whatever, dog rescue, adoption. Or it could be just that something inspired you by it. One of our absolute best donors was a wealth manager, a man named Bob Collins. And he actually came to an event that we did, because we did annual galas, and he was so excited by the work. He and his wife had one child born to them. They had not adopted. They had, I think that maybe at one time they thought about it, but they never actually did. But he very much believed in families. In his very effective wealth management practice, he worked a lot with generational wealth. He comes from a large Catholic family. Family just is so important to him. So when he saw the work that we were doing to make sure kids had families and then supporting families as kids grew, that was consistent with sort of his practice as a wealth manager. And so he got inspired at the event. I think I don't know if it was 1 or 2 events he came to, but then he invited us to come to his office and asked 27 questions, dug into our stuff and looked really carefully. And then he was like, okay, you got this. And it was probably it's been probably the last 15 years when he sold his business. He donated $250,000 to the agency and set up the Janice Goldwater Legacy Fund. That was probably two or so years before I left. Again, he wanted to make sure that my work stayed there. He continues to be a donor. He recently gave $15,000. And it's just when somebody's really good at what they do, connecting them to something that really matters, the joy that he and his wife got by knowing the families that were impacted by their donation is like priceless.
No, that's a great story for Bob Collins is, one of the key donors that stands out, where if there's a good match, he actually, he waters the plant, right? It's not a quick throwaway $50. He identifies with the mission. He's essentially a teammate in
That's right. That's what he'd say. He'd say, I'm your greatest cheerleader. That's what he used to say. I got you. I got you. I got you back. But the other donors, the $50 donors are critical.
Yeah.
They are absolutely critical. And, it's those $50 donors that can sustain an organization if you get enough of them.
I agree.
We had another donor. It was a family who, first they did interim care. They had 3 children born to them, and then they took care of babies until we knew they say were going back to their birth families or being adopted. And they fell in love with adoption. And so they decided they were really interested in kids in foster care, but they wanted to create financial resources so kids could get adopted out of foster care. So they went out into their community and raised money from there and then directly funded this program. So the costs of adopting a child out of foster care would be covered. It's creativity. It's really amazing.
Now, and thank you for indulging us, by the way. I know we've gone over an hour. But many people say galas are outdated. You strongly disagree. Why is that?
So I go old school because I have seen what's happened at a gala. I think events are really important still because one, they build community. We had an incredible group of volunteers who worked for probably 4 to 6, maybe 6 months to put it together. There was great friendships that were made during that time. There was purpose-driven activities. They would learn all about the work we were doing as and each other's kids and each other's families, and so it created this incredible community. And then the night of the event, people would come in and they would get so inspired that we found more board members. I remember one of our best board members was from a golf tournament. He was like, "Wow, I'm really inspired by this. Do you want to go out to lunch sometime? Can you tell me more?" I'm like, "Absolutely." And he ended up joining the board. So people often, like, they go to something and they have no idea what they're missing. They have no idea. I mean, because people often don't think about people this is not like in front of us.
Right, right. If it's, yeah, if they don't see it,
They don't see it. They don't
it's
know.
going out of mind, right? And so,
Yeah.
these events help, like you're saying, it helps expose to them on things they haven't thought of that might
That's right.
relate to them, and that might help you provide the services to. And
That's right.
mission.
That's
Uh,
right.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. If someone is listening today, and they have resources and wants to change lives, where should they start?
I think they should start with thinking about what they're interested in. What they're, what inspires them, and just even in conversations with their friends and family, and like what, for some people it's rescuing animals, another it's a medical cause, another it's something happening in this country or outside of this country. Of course, we're hit political asks every day, all day, which I find absolutely exhausting, absolutely exhausting. And I think it makes fundraising more difficult for organizations because, we have this fatigue of this political donations, but they should really think about it and then find out. So say you were interested in children and families, and we talk about permanency. Permanency is a word that means a child has a family like for always, not just till they're 18, but like, a child who's 34 who has grandparents now for her child, and so an organization that's got values that align with yours, and then reach out to me. You can look at, there's like nonprofit centers. You can go online and look at the nonprofit center in your community. There's all kinds of resources that are both online and in the community. You can look at the United Way, at specific organizations. And I mean, I think it's a kind of a personal thing, and it's figuring out like what matters. I remember Tom Burton, who was one of my favorite board members for lots of years, and he did the golf tournament for lots of years, but he said in his workplace, he was at Alex Brown Realty, and his workplace, they had a board development program. And so he met with the people at the nonprofit center. And they said, "What are you interested in?" And he said, "Golf." And they were like, "Well, we don't have a nonprofit around golf." It's like, "Well, I had 3 kids. Well, I adopted my kids." She's like, "Adoption? Well, maybe." Turns out he adopted his 3 kids through adoptions together, paths for families. And he was like, "I can't believe it. Like, it was right in front of me, but I didn't even see it."
That's amazing.
Yeah. And he was probably served 6 terms on the board.
Second to last question, Janice. What gives you hope about humanity today?
Connection. This conversation, this gives me hope. Anytime we can see each other, feel each other, I mean, it's just, it makes me feel so hopeful. And just really talking to you makes me feel really hopeful. It just, it just really does. When we can show up, it's a really hard time in our country and in our world. And when we can move past the stereotypes, the whatever, and we can see each other, and we can step up and be there for one another. That's what gives me tremendous hope. That's what gives me tremendous hope.
Amazing. If someone watching wanted to either reach out to you to have a more conversation or reach out to Paths for Families and support or participate, how would they do that?
Sure. So if somebody wanted to reach out to me, my email is Janice, JANICE.Goldwater@gmail. I have a LinkedIn. I haven't built my website. I'm going to do it soon, but I haven't yet. But I do consulting, and I do training in organizations and around the staff development, human development, neuroscience, clinical training, organizational work, succession planning. I love that subject if you can't tell.
Yeah.
And Paths for Families, the website is Paths, PATHSFOR Families, FAMILIES.org, pathsforfamilies.org. There's a beautiful website that, in fact, Bob Collins donated the money that helped us build that website. Again, it was a beautiful example of somebody looking at the infrastructure and saying, you're not telling your story as effectively as you could. Like, yeah, but we don't have any money to build a website. He's like, I'll help you.
Well, I'll tell you,
And
if you ever speak to Bob Collins, let him know I've looked at that website and it's a very well done website. And
oh, that's beautiful.
so
Yeah, maybe I'll send him this conversation. I haven't talked to him for a minute, but he's just a fabulous man who really made a huge difference in the life of an organization and the life of families.
Well, Janice Goldwater, thank you so much. This has been a fulfilling conversation on my side, and I hope on your side as well.
That's wonderful.
And we wish you a great rest of your day, and hopefully in the future we may have another episode. We never know.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Justin, so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care.